Love. It's the force that can lift us to the highest peaks of human emotion or plunge us into the darkest valleys of despair. We're taught that true love means letting go when necessary. But what happens when someone refuses to release their grip? This is the story of Sarah Mitchell and James Cooper, a tale of passion that twisted into possession, of romance that spiraled into obsession, and of a love so consuming that it ended in death. If I can't have you, no one will. Those words, whispered in a moment of desperate anger, would prove to be more than just an empty threat. They were a promise, a death sentence. In the spring of 2019, James Cooper was living what many would consider the American dream. At 32, he had a successful career in financial consulting, a beautiful home in suburban Connecticut, and was dating Catherine Reynolds, the woman he thought he'd spend the rest of his life with. But there was one problem. Sarah Mitchell wasn't ready to let go. 2 years earlier, Sarah and James had shared what she called an epic love story. Their whirlwind romance burned bright and fast. Weekend getaways, passionate declarations, and promises of forever. But for James, the intensity that initially drew him to Annie began to feel suffocating. She needed to know where I was every minute of every day, Maxwell once confided to a friend. If I didn't answer a text within 5 minutes, she'd call. If I didn't answer the call, she'd show up at my office. What James didn't know was that Sarah had started following him. Every coffee date with Catherine, every romantic dinner, every stolen kiss. Annie watched it all, her rage and jealousy building like a pressure cooker about to explode. On February 14th, James finally made his choice. He proposed to Catherine during a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard. The next day, Sarah's colleague would later recall, she seemed unusually calm. Too calm. She requested time off work, citing a family emergency. She emptied her savings account. And she purchased something that would change everything. A bottle of colorless, odorless liquid that would never be detected in an autopsy. What happened next would shock a community, destroy multiple lives, and prove that sometimes the line between love and hatred is thinner than we'd like to believe. Sarah Mitchell and James Cooper's story began like many great romances do, with a chance encounter that felt like destiny. At a charity gala in downtown Hartford, their eyes met across a crowded room. Sarah, brilliant and ambitious in her pharmaceutical research career, was immediately drawn to James's quiet confidence. He, in turn, found himself captivated by her sharp wit and infectious laugh. Their connection was immediate and intense. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Sarah would later tell friends that she'd never believed in soulmates until she met James. For a year, they lived what seemed like a fairy tale. Spontaneous weekend getaways, intimate dinners, and promises of forever filled their days. James gave Sarah a key to his apartment after just 3 months, something he'd never done with previous girlfriends. But fairy tales, as Sarah would learn, often hide darker truths beneath their shining surface. The first signs were subtle. A late night at the office here, a canceled dinner there. James's text responses grew shorter, less frequent. Sarah told herself she was being paranoid, that this was normal in any relationship. But deep down, she felt something shifting. Then came the email that shattered everything. It was a simple mistake, the kind that has exposed countless affairs. While using James's laptop one evening, Sarah noticed a dinner reservation confirmation pop up. La Maison, Hartford's most intimate restaurant, table for 2. The reservation wasn't for her. Most people would have confronted their partner immediately. But Sarah was methodical, calculating. She began to dig deeper, and what she found destroyed her world piece by piece. Email receipts for jewelry she'd never received. Messages to someone saved only as K. Photos buried in his cloud storage of James with another woman, Catherine Reynolds, a legal associate at his firm. The pictures told a story that tore Sarah apart. While she'd been planning their future, James had been building one with Catherine. Coffee dates, stolen kisses in the park, intimate dinners, a parallel romance that had been unfolding right under her nose for months. When Sarah finally confronted James, his response was perhaps the cruelest part. No desperate apologies. No begging for forgiveness. Just a calm, almost rehearsed speech about how they'd grown apart, how he hadn't meant for things to happen this way, how Catherine understood him in ways Sarah never could. "I think we want different things," he said, as if their entire relationship could be dismissed with a cliché. That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah felt something inside her break. She pulled out their photo albums, their love letters, every tangible piece of their relationship, and spread them across her floor. As she sat surrounded by the evidence of their love, something changed in her. The pain of betrayal crystallized into something harder, darker. She picked up her phone and typed out a message to James. "If I can't have you, no one will." He never responded. For most people, such a threat would be nothing more than the angry words of a wounded heart. But Sarah wasn't most people. In her job as a pharmaceutical researcher, she had access to knowledge that most people didn't. Knowledge that, in the wrong hands, could be deadly. As James and Catherine's relationship blossomed publicly, Sarah retreated into shadows of her own making. She created fake social media accounts to monitor their every move. She started keeping a detailed journal of their activities. Every date, every public appearance, every shared moment became another entry in her growing obsession. Her colleagues at the research facility began to notice changes in her. The once vibrant Sarah became withdrawn, focused almost exclusively on her work with certain compounds, particularly those that were difficult to trace in standard toxicology reports. When James proposed to Catherine during a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard, Sarah watched through the lens of a telephoto camera she'd purchased specifically for surveillance. As Catherine said yes and James slipped the ring onto her finger, Sarah made a decision. She would not be the woman scorned who simply faded away. She would make sure that if she couldn't have James Cooper, no one would. Sarah Mitchell's obsession with James Cooper began to consume every aspect of her life. Her once pristine apartment transformed into a shrine to their relationship, walls covered with photos, sticky notes marking dates and locations, red string connecting various events like a detective's evidence board gone wrong. But it wasn't just memories she was collecting. Sarah began constructing an elaborate fantasy world where she and James were still together. In her leather-bound journal, she wrote detailed stories about their future, the wedding they'd have, the children they'd raise, the life they'd share. These weren't just dreams. To Sarah, they were prophecies waiting to be fulfilled. Her research at the pharmaceutical facility took a dark turn. She spent countless hours studying various compounds, particularly those that could alter behavior or induce dependence. Her colleagues noticed her asking unusual questions about drugs that could be administered without detection, but they assumed it was professional curiosity. Sarah became fixated on the idea of control, her former research partner would later testify. She was particularly interested in substances that could make someone compliant. The surveillance escalated. Sarah installed a sophisticated tracking device on James's car, monitoring his every movement. She knew his daily routine better than he did, when he got coffee, when he went to the gym, which routes he took to work. She began timing her own movements to deliberately cross his path, creating what she believed were chance encounters. These manufactured meetings became more frequent. She'd appear at his favorite coffee shop, his gym, even client meetings. Each time she acted surprised to see him, but her journal told a different story. Detailed plans, scheduled accidents, carefully chosen outfits meant to remind him of their best moments together. "Just seeing him isn't enough anymore," she wrote. "I need him to remember. I need him to understand that Catherine can never love him like I do. She doesn't know him like I do. She doesn't deserve him." Sarah's obsession extended to Catherine as well. She created detailed dossiers on her rival, documenting everything from her daily schedule to her food allergies. She joined the same yoga studio, hired a private investigator to dig into Catherine's past, and even befriended Catherine's elderly neighbor to gather intelligence. The breaking point came when Sarah discovered James and Catherine had set their wedding date. In her journal, the entries became increasingly erratic. "They think they can just erase me? Everything we had? I won't let them. I won't let her take him. He's mine." She began testing different scenarios in her mind, writing them out in meticulous detail. Pages of her journal were filled with various plans. ways to separate James from Catherine, ways to make him dependent on her again, ways to eliminate the competition entirely. One entry stood out to investigators. Sometimes love means making hard choices for someone else. James might not understand now, but he will. Once she's gone, once it's just us again, he'll remember why we belong together. And this time, I'll make sure he never leaves. Sarah's workplace access card began showing strange hours, late-night visits to the research labs, unauthorized access to restricted areas. She was building something, preparing something. In her mind, it wasn't about hurting James anymore. It was about saving him. From Catherine, from himself, from a future without her. Love is like a chemical reaction, she wrote in her final journal entry before everything changed. Sometimes you have to add the right catalyst to get the result you want. I've found my catalyst. Now I just need the right moment to use it. That moment would come sooner than anyone expected, and its consequences would shock even the most hardened investigators. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Cream-colored paper with gold lettering, announcing the union of James Cooper and Catherine Reynolds. Sarah stood in her kitchen, the elegant card trembling in her hands. For all her surveillance, all her planning, seeing it there in black and gold made it real in a way nothing else had. She drove to James's apartment that night, her mind clouded with a toxic mixture of desperation and rage. She'd convinced herself that if she could just talk to him one last time, make him understand, he would change his mind, the same way she'd convinced herself every other time. But this confrontation was different. When James opened the door, Catherine was there too. They'd been preparing wedding invitations together, dozens of cream-colored envelopes spread across the coffee table, the same table where Sarah and James had shared countless dinners. "You can't marry her," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "We're meant to be together, James, you know that." James's response was gentle but firm. "Sarah, you need help. What we had, it's over. It's been over for a long time. Catherine and I? Catherine and you, what?" Sarah's whisper turned to a snarl. "She'll never love you like I do. She'll never understand you like I do. She doesn't deserve you." "That's enough." James's gentleness vanished. "You need to leave. Now, or I'm calling the police." In that moment, seeing James protect Catherine, something inside Sarah shattered completely. The last thread holding her to reality snapped. She reached into her purse, fingers wrapping around the small vial she'd prepared in her lab. "If I can't have you," she thought, remembering her promise, "no one will." Her decision was made. The next time she saw James Cooper, it would be for the last time. 2 days before James and Catherine's wedding, Sarah made her final move. She knew James's routine perfectly. Every Friday, he would stop at Cafe Luna for his morning coffee before heading to work. It was a ritual that hadn't changed in years, not even after their breakup. That morning, Sarah arrived early. She sat in the corner, watching as the barista prepared the day's pastries. She'd chosen this day carefully. Catherine was out of town for her final dress fitting. James would be alone. When he walked in, Sarah didn't approach immediately. She watched him order his usual medium dark roast, 1 sugar. As he waited, she removed the small vial from her purse. The clear liquid inside was her own creation, synthesized in late-night lab sessions. Untraceable, she'd made sure of that. "James," she called out softly, approaching him with a sad smile. "I owe you an apology." He tensed but didn't walk away. Perhaps it was the sincerity in her voice, or maybe just politeness. That fatal moment of hesitation would cost him everything. "I've been unfair," Sarah continued, her fingers tight around the vial in her pocket. "I thought maybe we could talk. One last time before the wedding?" James checked his watch, then nodded. 5 minutes, Sarah, that's all." They sat at a corner table, his coffee between them. When he looked down at his phone, Sarah's movement was swift and practiced. The liquid disappeared into his cup, dissolving instantly, leaving no trace, no taste, no warning of what was to come. "I just want you to be happy," Sarah said, watching as he lifted the cup to his lips. "That's all I ever wanted." The effects weren't immediate. James finished his coffee, checked his watch again, and stood to leave. "I appreciate this, Sarah. I hope you find peace." Those were his last words to her. By the time he reached his office, the compound had already begun its work. Security cameras caught his stumble, the way he grabbed his chest, the confusion on his face as he collapsed in the lobby. The official cause of death would be listed as a heart attack. Natural causes. A tragic loss of a young man in his prime. Only Sarah knew the truth, that James Cooper's last breath was taken with the same blind trust he'd always shown her, right until the end. As emergency services rushed to the scene, Sarah drove home calmly, her promise fulfilled. If she couldn't have James Cooper, no one would. Now, no one ever would. In the hours after James Cooper's death, Sarah Mitchell crafted her performance masterfully. She was among the first to arrive at the hospital, tears streaming down her face, playing the role of the heartbroken ex who never stopped caring. The perfect alibi was already in place, security footage showing her calmly working in her lab when James collapsed. But Sarah's real masterpiece was what came next. Over the following days, she carefully planted evidence suggesting Catherine had been embezzling money from James's firm. Anonymous tips to the police hinted at Catherine's suspicious behavior leading up to James's death. A crafted paper trail suggested Catherine had accessed medical records about James's non-existent heart condition. The cruelest touch? Sarah sent a condolence letter to James's parents, sharing concerns about Catherine's recent interest in his life insurance policy. For 6 months, the investigation focused on Catherine. The grieving fiancé became the prime suspect, her life torn apart by suspicion. Sarah watched from the sidelines, offering support, playing the devoted friend, all while tightening the noose around Catherine's neck. But the truth has a way of emerging from the darkest corners. It was a junior lab technician who first noticed the discrepancies in Sarah's research logs. Small inconsistencies in the inventory, missing compounds, late-night access that didn't match her experiments. Like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together, the picture began to form. When the police finally arrested Sarah, they found her in James's old apartment, which she'd secretly leased after his death. The walls were covered with photos of him, their life together, and the life she'd imagined they'd have. In her desk drawer, they discovered her final journal entry. "I saved him. Catherine would have destroyed him slowly, turned him into someone he wasn't. At least this way, he'll always be mine. In memory, in spirit, in death. Love doesn't end just because someone stops breathing." But here's where our story takes its final, unsettling turn. During Sarah's trial, evidence emerged that Catherine had indeed been concealing something. An affair with James's best friend started just weeks before the wedding. James never knew. Sarah Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no remorse, maintaining until the end that her actions were born of love. A love so deep, it transcended morality, law, and life itself. Today, Sarah sits in her cell, surrounded by the same photos that once covered her walls. She receives regular letters from true crime enthusiasts who see her as a tragic figure, a woman driven to extremes by betrayal and love. Some even call her actions romantic. But as we close this dark chapter, we're left with haunting questions. In a world where love and obsession can look so similar, how do we tell them apart? Was Sarah a calculating killer, or a woman driven mad by betrayal? And in her twisted way, did she succeed, ensuring that James would remain forever hers, if only in memory? Perhaps most disturbing of all, how many Sarah Mitchells are out there right now, watching, waiting, convinced that their obsession is love? The next time someone says, "If I can't have you, no one will," remember James Cooper. Remember that sometimes the most dangerous weapons aren't guns or knives, but hearts that love too possessively, minds that blur the line between devotion and destruction. After all, the scariest monsters aren't those that hide under our beds. They're the ones that hide behind smiles, behind love notes, behind promises of forever. And sometimes they never let go.
Do you think Sarah's imprisonment was deserved or a mere coincidence? Leave your comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe to True Crime Revealed to get more shocking true crime stories.